Hey, are we all turned on and ready to go, Jennifer?
Yes, we are.
Okay, welcome. We're back in session. Welcome to those who are online. We are now on agenda item number 3, agenda and approval of the minutes. I know of one change we need to make to the agenda. We need to move the director's report up, probably right behind public comment.
Yes.
Okay. So with that, is there consensus to make that one change to the agenda? And is there a motion to approve the agenda as changed? And then there's 2 sets of minutes. Did anybody peruse the minutes?
I looked through them, but they look good to me, but your memories.
Okay, does anybody see any need for any changes or corrections to the minutes as printed?
Would move to approve.
Okay,
Second.
okay. Question?
You didn't finish the motion on modifying the agenda, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I have to, that has to be a separate motion?
I made that motion.
Okay, Al moved and Pat seconded to amend the agenda. All in favor, say aye. Okay, any opposed? Motion carries. All right, now the motion to approve the amended agenda and approve the 2 sets of minutes.
I so move.
Okay, second. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we are to the next item, which is public comment. It looks like we have some people who would like to talk for a minute. First up is Mr. Jones. Doug, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, board members. Several of you that I talked to earlier in the week knew we were going to have a Zoom meeting with Forest Service yesterday on our Lost Valley project. We did have that, and it went, we think, very, very well. So let me tell you quickly what the Forest Service said to us. There were 5 Forest Service folks on the call and 5 folks from Lost Valley. And the highlights for you guys, their cost numbers for what they will need to, their cost recovery numbers to work through the project with us came in below budget. That's good news for all of us. And some of that money, we won't even have to put up right now. Some of it we will, roughly half, but some of it won't have to be put up until we get closer to the construction phase of the project. So that also is good news. And they, after a discussion, we asked if it would be beneficial if we could make a presentation to the decision board of the Payette National Forest. And the district ranger said she thought that was a great idea. She would propose it at their meeting next week. So we will be invited either for February or March, make a presentation to the Payette Forest supervisor and all of the district rangers and folks who make decisions on which projects they prioritize in their next year's work schedule. This is on the agenda, but they have to decide which ones they're going to do first. So that's good. We'll go February or March to McCall and make that presentation. And the only bad news out of the meeting, the district ranger that we've had in the New Meadows district is leaving for another position. She's been very good, very cooperative, very helpful, but she's going to Florida. So we don't know who we will have going forward. The other piece of Lost Valley, and this is something you've all heard before, squirrels. We got the updated squirrel report from this summer's squirrel survey from Dr. Jensen, who's retired professor from College of Idaho, the acknowledged expert on North Idaho ground squirrels. And I think it also is fairly favorable. And I'm going to read you two very quick things. This is out of the executive summary. We only saw 2 North Idaho ground squirrels in the area to be inundated, but they move around in the habitat over time. So only 2 squirrels in the area that will potentially be inundated. And I think that's good news for us. And this is actually from an earlier report, but he has included it in his report. And this is about the description of the project. It says, in addition to water storage for irrigation, the expected benefits of raising the pool level would include additional recreation opportunities such as fishing, boating, and camping. This project also expected to increase in summer stream flows and improve riparian habitat, as well as provide better connectivity for bull trout, another threatened population. Federally threatened fish in the Weasel River system, as well as throughout the range of the continental U.S. Deeper water for fish in the reservoir during the winter would reduce the need for annual stocking by Idaho Fish and Game. This is actually from the Ground Squirrel Technical Working Group report several years back. So they have recognized all of the benefits of the project in addition to the irrigation piece. So, Mr. Chairman, I just want to give you those updates. We have the squirrel report. It's in technical editing, so I can't give you a copy, but we do have it and it'll be ready to be shared with Forest Service probably in a week or two. And the report on the Forest Service meeting, which we thought was very good news, and we will appear in McCall whenever meeting we get scheduled for. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions or go sit down.
Okay, and board members, any questions for Doug? Looks like you're off the hook. Thank you for attending today. Appreciate the update. Okay, next I have TJ Budge. TJ, do you want to comment now, or would you rather hold your comments until we get to the agenda item on recharge?
My preference would be to wait for those agenda items, but I can offer them now if you'd like.
Yeah, we'll just take that up when we get to the recharge agenda item. Okay, and that's all I have on the list. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to comment? Okay, thank you one and all. We move on to the next item.
The director's report.
The director's report. Mr. Director.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I feel like I've done enough talking for the week. I think you've heard from me enough this week, as has the public. So just one reminder that we're in full swing with the legislature. A lot of requests are coming to us specifically regarding our budget. And then legislation that is being proposed, not by us, not by the board, but by other entities that may be impacting us. Our legal group does a good job of getting that weekly report out. If you're not seeing that, you should, because it identifies not only water-specific legislation, but legislation that might impact other processes that that affect us. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll let you get back to your agenda. Thanks, unless there's questions.
Okay, that works for us. Thank you very much for your brevity and appreciate your service. And know it takes a lot of time this time of the year to manage everybody and everything. Okay, financial report.
Neely, give the financial report, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Director, members of the board. Today, I'll be giving you the financial status report. As of November 31st, 2024, the board's available and committed balances are as follows. And you'll see this coming up on your screen just right now. So in the secondary account, the board has a cash balance of approximately $37.5 million, a committed balance of roughly $33 million, and an uncommitted balance of approximately $4.4 million. In the revolving development account, the board has a cash balance of approximately $37.6 million, a committed balance of roughly $28.9 million, a loan principal outstanding of $19.8 million, and an uncommitted balance of roughly $8.7 million. In the board's water management account, you have a cash balance of roughly $322 million, total obligated funds of approximately $307 million, and unobligated funds of approximately $14.7 million. When you take the board's three accounts together, the board has a total committed earmarked a balance of roughly $369,045,962, a total loan principal outstanding of 19,807,969 and a total uncommitted, unobligated balance of 27,882,351. Here I've made some notes on the ARPA appropriations. As you can see here, the board has received to date $200 million in ARPA appropriation. And the board fiscal staff anticipates receipt of the additional 50 million from the 2026 ARPA appropriation on or shortly after July 1. And then you can see here that there's a total obligated of 250 million because that's the total ARPA funding, expended 109 million, and a remaining committed balance of approximately 150 million. You can see there that there's a little bit more expended than there is obligated there. There's an overflow that allows us to use the water management account to get that additional like 4 million. Then here you can see the obligated and unobligated balances in the water management account include funding from the following appropriations. And then lastly here, I've made a note that because these balance sheets are as of November 31st, there was a board meeting, a special board meeting in December. And the one action that was taken by the board was the groundwater to surface water conversion grants, where you awarded roughly 13,330,625. And that would have no impact on these November uncommitted balances because that was already budgeted in the for additional loans portion of that. So with that, I would stand for any questions.
Any questions for Neely? Okay, very good. Thank you. Next item, the governor's proposed budget. Mr. Patton?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to discuss the governor's proposed budget, and that should be up on your screen at this point. You know, the governor has released his proposed budget for the Department of Water Resources for fiscal year 2026. Next slide, please, Jennifer. Okay, so I'm going to start with the decision units that the department requested. The first is the aquifer planning cash transfer of $716,000. That is an annual transfer of a loan payment that comes back to the board from the Magic Valley and North Snake groundwater districts. Thank you, Dean, for their participation in the Pristine Springs project. That comes into the board revolving development account, and every year that is transferred through the budget process to the department's aquifer planning fund. Those funds are used to pay staff that perform aquifer monitoring, measurement, and modeling work. So, you know, pretty important dollars. Of note, I just want to make sure you all are aware the last scheduled payment from the groundwater districts is January of 27. So the department may need to be trying to figure out how to backfill that budget source when those payments are done.
Dean doesn't intend on making additional contributions beyond January.
Next slide, please, gentlemen. The next decision unit I want to talk about is the department's request for water administration positions. This is 5 positions and $517,000 to support the operation and creation of new water districts throughout the state. As you know, water districts are the entity through which water rights are administered on a stream or an aquifer system. We talk about Water District 1, Water District 63, Water District 37, Water District 11. This would be to support the creation of new water districts initially to administer groundwater rights in the areas tributary to the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer. But as we've heard, there are concerns in other parts of the state as well that water rights are not being administered properly. So this was recommended by the governor as well. Next slide, please. The next decision unit the department requested was $127,000 for a public information officer. This would utilize a vacant, unfunded position to hire a full-time public information officer. These services are currently provided by Steve Stubner under contract. Steve is looking to, scale back his operations a little bit, and the many actions by both the department and the board are increasingly highly visible. So they would probably benefit from having a full-time public information officer embedded on the staff. Next slide, please. And if anybody has any questions, please ask, as I'm going through these fairly quickly. The Esri maintenance costs, that's an increase of $58,000 for increased license costs associated with the ArcGIS software. The ArcGIS software is, of course, embedded in many or most of the department's business processes. So, this is a necessity at this point. Laserfish conversion. This is $65,000 to continue our efforts to create online forms within the Laserfish software to allow online filing of various water rights processes. This one would be for the proof of beneficial use filings. Next slide, please. The governor has recommended just under $458,000 for replacement items. These are vehicles, computers, and some other IT equipment. And then the governor has also requested a 5% change in employee compensation. And that's usually given, or discretion is given to the director. Some discretion is given to the director to determine how to parse that out amongst employees. Next slide, please. And then, of course, you've all heard about the governor's initiative of $30 million in ongoing funds for water projects. The way the governor has proposed this would be the $30 million would go into the water management account to be used at the discretion of the Water Resource Board. It could be used for recharge, taking the recharge volume from 250,000 to 350,000, other aquifer management projects, aging infrastructure grant projects, regional water sustainability projects, and the like. And yeah.
Brian, does that include the flood control? Or is that any different?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barker, this would be in addition to the flood control grants. So the flood control grants are, that's a $1 million annual appropriation that comes through the department's budget and is shifted into the water management account for the flood control grants. Okay. Next slide, please. I think that wraps it up, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know I went through that fairly quickly.
Board members, any additional questions for Mr. Patton? Brian?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Brian, any idea, I guess you probably don't know yet, when you and Matt or Jeff or whoever will present the legislature, the department stuff?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Olmstead, there's a couple of meetings being scheduled. There's a meeting, let's see, I think the department's presentation and the board's presentation, the House Resources Committee, is currently being scheduled for, I think, February 5th. February, looking to Jennifer for confirmation on that.
Somewhere between 3 and 5.
3 and 5, okay. And then the department's budget hearing in front of the Joint Finance Appropriation Committee is scheduled for March 2nd, I believe. Don't hold me to that exact date. I'd have to look it up, but it's in that ballpark.
You'll let us know when you know.
Yes.
Director Weaver.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just looking at my calendar, presenting rules in the Senate on Monday, January 27th, and the Senate Resource Committee has reached out and say they don't need any other presentation from us. But if we wanted to request to present, we could. And then we have rules and the agency board presentation to the House in the following week, consistent with those dates. So maybe light duty this year compared to some of the years past, at least right now.
And then we have some confirmations coming up in the Senate Resource Committee as well.
Yes, I believe Dean is scheduled for Monday in the Senate Resource. They're calling you guys individually this year, so I haven't heard.
And I have not been called yet.
But that undoubtedly will be forthcoming.
Yes, I will make sure that happens.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Patton. Next up is a federal affairs update, and we have Mr. Limbaugh here today.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. It's a pleasure to be here. And I always look forward to bringing you all up to speed on what we've been doing and what we're looking forward to doing in this next coming year. Obviously, we've had quite a change in Washington, and hopefully for the better and for water resources in particular. First of all, the Congress needs to deal with their appropriations issue. Right now, we're under a temporary continuing resolution, or CR, that has extended the federal government funding through March 14th. They have not done anything to come up with top-line spending agreement, which is necessary in order for the appropriators to do their job and get their appropriations bills finished and through both the House and Senate. There's market differences, maybe not in the numbers so much. If you look on the screen, it's the Senate is about $2 billion for energy and water development and the Bureau of Reclamation. And the House is about 1.95. The issue is you have a lot of policy writers that are in these bills that the House has and the Senate doesn't. So there's going to be a lot of discussion in between the two bodies, and there's really not much time left before the March 14th deadline. So we're either going to see some kind of an omnibus that the four corners of the Congress, mainly the leadership on both the House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, coming together and say, look, we got to just put this thing out there, vote on it up or down, and let's move on. Or we're going to see another CR. And if we see another CR, we're far enough along in the year that it's very possible that it may be a full year CR, at least partially for some of these agencies. So we'll wait and see. The CR is a problem for agencies like the Bureau of Reclamation, for instance, because they can only go month to month. They can't expend dollars like they know what they have for the rest of the year because they don't know what the appropriation bill is going to do. It may cut it back. It may give them more. So, they've just basically got to go month to month under a CR because it's based on last year's appropriation. So it really ties their hands. The fortunate thing on some of the grant programs is that they've had the IIJA, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and the Inflation Reduction Act funding that has already been appropriated. And so their grant programs seem to be going along, pretty regularly. And I'll go through that a little bit. Next slide, please, Jennifer. In terms of that spending plan, in FY25, the Bureau comes up every year with a spending plan on their bipartisan infrastructure law appropriations. And currently, their aging infrastructure loans, they're looking at putting out $670 million. And many of these have already been announced, mainly not because it's the end of the fiscal year, it's because it's the end of the administration. And they're trying to get this money out the door as quickly as possible because they don't know what the new administration may do, which we really haven't heard much of anything other than we think they're going to probably continue to put this funding out, but put it out under their priorities rather than the previous administration priorities. But we've seen WinAct storage projects, $207 million. Some of that went to Anderson Ranch for the increased costs associated with that project. Small storage grants of $25 million. I'll talk a little bit about those because we want to see if we can tweak that program to better fit the Idaho Water Board's priorities. There's a reclamation project that suffered damage. That was basically the Milk River project in Montana. They've gotten the majority of their funding. They only had $2.5 million left in 25. The CARE Act, they're spending another $31 million there. And that's for a dam in Wyoming that was supposed to be, fixed, and now it looks like they're going to take it out. So that $100 million is pretty much spoken for on that. And then the Water Smart program continues to chug along. Next slide, please. With desalination grants, rural water, they just announced those, I think yesterday. Dam safety projects are on the books already as well. Cooperative management, watershed management, they announced some grants for watershed groups funding just the other day. Aquatic ecosystem, they just announced that the other day as well. So A lot of this funding has been already spoken for and out there. Mr. Chairman, Albert, I think you asked me the other day how much money is left. They have one more year of about $1.66 billion under the Inflation Reduction Act for FY '26. So that's starting this next September. They'll start to put another spending plan out, and the new administration will be basically looking at putting that funding out. So they've been spending about $1.66 billion every year over the course of this 5-year infrastructure program. Next slide.
Mark, any chance some of that might get clawed back or?
That's a really good question, Mr. Chairman. And, we've talked to the Speaker's office. I've talked to the delegation, some folks in the transition team. I don't think they're really looking at clawing that money back. I think probably I'd be more worried about some of the COVID money that's not been obligated yet. Some of that money may be clawed back. I think a lot of the money in the Inflation Reduction Act that hasn't been obligated for climate purposes, like the EV tax credits, the $20 billion in climate smart agriculture. Some of that money's already been obligated, but I think for the money that hasn't been, they may be looking at that to pay for some of the tax cuts in the upcoming Congress. So the extension of the tax cuts, I should say. So we'll see, but I don't think they're after the water money. I think that they realize that, and I could be wrong, but that's my thinking is that they're probably not going to be looking at trying to claw that money back. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, there was $4 billion appropriated to the Bureau for drought mitigation funding, mainly for the Colorado River, but also river basins that have experienced drought in the past. They also have ecosystem restoration for ecosystems that have been impacted by drought in a Bureau Reclamation basin. That funding, the ecosystem funding is looking to be announced, and that's for the Upper Colorado Basin today. So they're just now finishing up a lot of the funding that they've got out there. There's still, I think, funding left in that bucket. But a lot of it is for the upper and lower basin of Colorado in dealing with their drought issues down there. There was $550 million for disadvantaged community domestic water supply that was appropriated to the Bureau. Bureau is typically not a domestic water supply agency, but they do have a program they've stood up that would allow for grants to go out to various communities based on their disadvantaged status for upgrades to domestic water supply. And some of that money has gone out as well. And then there was a $25 million over canal solar project that I think has been expended to several projects in the Southwest, I believe. Next slide. The issues that we worked on this past year for the board, the Bureau of Land Management has been kind of a top front burner issue for us because of the issues related to how they read the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act that we got passed here a few years ago. They read that to say that the board is not eligible to use existing canals, even under agreement with existing rights-of-way holders, because we're a third party, and they read the act as meaning only to it only applies to the current holder of the right-of-way. I've worked with the Attorney General's office, with Ann and with Leslie, to no avail. We had a letter go from the delegation to the administration asking them to fix this. They refused to fix this because they've got a solicitor that's burrowed in here on this particular issue. So we developed some language, legislative language. We worked with BLM and the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee to come up with a game plan and a draft bill. We got that bill dropped in the 118th Congress. It did pass through committee. It did not pass through the Senate. And we didn't get the bill dropped in the House quick enough to get it marked up in the duck. So right now we've got, and talk about this for this year, We have worked with the House and we do have a House bill, HR 331, that is going to have a hearing next week. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But we did get through the committee, and typically the Senate committee will go through their bills that they've marked up in the last Congress and basically mark them up in one fell swoop in this Congress and get them ready for floor action. So hopefully we're in that mix. We had a Washington DC trip last September with some of the board in attendance, and we met with the delegation, with the staff, key congressional committees, and administration appointees at the Bureau of Reclamation. Thought it was a successful trip. Certainly, anytime that you're back there talking about Idaho's issues, everybody that I've been around are very impressed with how Idaho manages their water resources and how far ahead we are in terms of other Western states. I won't name those in public. But we also provided testimony for the record for that aquifer recharge bill, and we obviously got that through that committee. Next slide. The other bills that the board has been interested in is the urban canal bill. That's S2160, HR 6107. That bill did pass the Senate. It went through the committee and passed the Senate. Unfortunately, the chairman of the Senate Energy Committee, Mr. Manchin, had some changes that he wanted to, in exchange for getting it through the committee, and he reduced the 35% that we had in the original bill, which would allow for something similar to what's already in law, allowing for a 35% grant to emergency extraordinary maintenance. In other words, canal failures or almost failures, things that happen that, basically need to be fixed quickly. And so we modeled this 35% for urban canals, similar to that emergency amount that's already in law. Mr. Manchin wanted to reduce that to 25% and get 10% from the state or local agency before you could apply for a loan to fix the rest of the canal. So we are looking at a strategy for this Congress that hopefully we can get back to the 35% and not have the 10%. In Idaho, it's not a problem for the 10%. The problem is Washington State, Oregon, California, other states that have these urban canals, they don't have the 10%. So it doesn't really do them any good because they want to be able to utilize the aging infrastructure account, get loans to fix these canals. So we want to go back to the 35, but we've got some strategy there to talk about with our delegation. On the CARE Act bill, as I described, there's a provision in the bipartisan infrastructure law that provided for $100 million for CARE Act projects that were built after a certain time that were deemed to be an issue by the governor, and that the way they crafted it, the only project that was eligible for help on that was the project in Wyoming. And so basically what we did was we wanted to have a bill that if there's money left over, we want to be able to use that for other CARE Act projects, and specifically for Milner Dam repairs here in Idaho. And so we crafted that bill. It made it through the committee again, but did not get a Senate vote. And it's only been introduced in the House. We haven't had a hearing yet on that. The issue with it in the House is that the Congressional Budget Office has scored it. So there's a cost to it. And we disagree with how they scored it. So we're going to try to get through that and see if we can move that bill forward. There may not be any money left, but what we're trying to do is get that authorizing language in there to where at some point we may want to try to get an appropriation, for instance, or an earmark to help with Milner Dam. So if we get the authorization, then that's a huge benefit for moving forward in the future. And then finally, we already talked about the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act amendments. And then the Congress in the last days did pass the Water Resource Development Act to 2024. That's the Corps of Engineers authorization bill that authorizes studies and new projects for the Corps of Engineers. So we watch that pretty closely for anything that has to do with projects in Idaho. So we didn't really see a lot in there other than some of there's a real interest in water supply and getting the Corps involved in that. So I think in Idaho, it's that fine line between flood control and water supply that we always ride every year, depending on the snowpack. So those are all the things that we watch for in that bill. Next slide. Water Smart, we got some grants coming up here that may be of interest to some folks in Idaho and possibly the board. Small scale efficiency grants have closed on the 14th. Applied science, environmental water resource projects are due in March. Aquatic ecosystem restoration in April. There was a project in Nampa that did get some funding out of the last aquatic ecosystem restoration grants. The city of Nampa applied for something on the Boise River. The cooperative watershed management program is May, and the large scale water reuse recycling grants are in April. So there's still some active grant programs out there. Next slide.
Mark, what is the environmental, or whatever we call it, environmental? When we do it, March?
The environmental water resources projects. Well, I would refer you to the Bureau's website. I'm not as familiar with the details, but my understanding is that that those projects are for like restoration type projects. So I'll have to get back to you, Al, on that with some information on that. They've come up with all these different grant programs, and they're some of them are different, some of them are pretty much the same. So we just got to look at them. Okay, in terms of the incoming administration, you've all been riveted, I'm sure, to the TV on various confirmation hearings this week. Governor Burgum had his confirmation hearing yesterday, and I didn't hear of any big fireworks that came out of that. EPA, he had his hearing this week, and from what I understand, he is confirmable. Didn't really have any problems. Ms. Bondi had a very lively discussion. The USDA, I believe, is next week. Brooke Rollins for the Secretary of Ag. Chris Wright, I know with Energy, he had his hearing this week, and I think Russell Vogt is next week. And what I see on the administration, the priorities, right out of the box, are going to be regulatory streamlining or undoing what the previous administration undid from the previous Trump administration. So it's going to be kind of the ping pong game again in terms of back to the future. We're going to go back to some of the first Trump administration priorities and try to get those back into, a number of executive orders. I believe there's probably going to be 100 of them on Monday released. So we'll be looking through those. There was about 6 executive orders under the previous Trump administration that dealt with water issues. Some of that in terms of everything from NEPA streamlining to actual Western Water Memorandum that basically said maximize water resources for the use of for farming and people. And so there's going to be a lot of talk about, the ESA, Clean Water Act, WOTUS, PFAS is going to be an issue. I think they'll probably pull back on. They've got to be careful because of lawsuits and backsliding and all that kind of thing. But this administration has been very aggressive on PFAS, and so we'll see what happens in this new administration. Infrastructure, I believe, is still going to be a priority, and that's why I think that some of the funding that is going out for infrastructure is going to continue. And we're going to see, I think, an emphasis on making sure that the investments are made for the future of water infrastructure in the West. NEPA streamlining, we're going to probably see that Biden NEPA rule revoked and start over. As you remember, Congress did pass some language in in their Deficit Reduction Act bill that raised the debt ceiling. It's been a long time ago because Mr. McCarthy was the speaker then. But it did codify some of the reforms that the previous Trump administration had made in rule that the Biden administration revoked, dealing with the size of the NEPA, the page numbers, for instance, the timelines in terms of how quickly they needed to get NEPA done. And so those are in law, and I look for the Trump administration to come in and recodify through their rulemaking how those NEPA changes are going to be implemented. I also have on here Lower Snake dams, and I think that's something that's probably going to be reversed in this administration, and looking at how they go through and try to slow down or stop the studies that the Biden administration has started in looking at trying to get those dams removed. So we'll see what happens there, but I'm pretty sure that this administration is not going to go down that path. Next slide. In the Congress, the House GOP control is slim, 220 to 215, and it's even slimmer than that because we have several representatives that either have resigned or are going to resign because they're going into the administration and haven't been replaced yet. So it's going to be down to 1 or 2 votes here pretty quick. And so Speaker Johnson was just reelected. He's got a hell of a job ahead of him in terms of trying to figure out how he gets all this stuff done and keep all of his Republicans in line. Minority Leader Jeffries retained his position as well. And a lot of the issues we're going to be working on, budget reconciliation, you've probably heard that before. That's a process that the Senate has where they can pass a resolution, a budget resolution on just a strictly majority vote, and not have to go through the 60 vote threshold for a filibuster. And so we're going to see a budget reconciliation bill in both the House and Senate. The House is going to try to do one bill that has the tax cuts, the border issues, the security issues, all the things that the Trump administration want to come in and get done. The Senate bill is probably going to look at 2 budget reconciliation bills. You can do 1 per fiscal year. And so we'll see which ones get done first. So it's going to be a race. Appropriations, as I mentioned, are going to have to be done. The 2026 appropriations budget is going to be coming out. It's supposed to come out in February. It'll probably be delayed because of the new administration going through the budget request. But then they have to start that pretty quick. So trying to get 25 done before you get into 26, they're going to have to deal with that. Energy and climate policies, obviously, climate change has changed its stripes a little bit in this Congress, and so we'll see a little bit less emphasis on that, more emphasis on energy production. Regulatory reform, we had a bipartisan deal with in the Senate that didn't go anywhere because it didn't go far enough for the House. So I think they'll start talking about doing some more regulatory reform in this Congress. The Farm Bill has not been done yet, so we'll see some fireworks over that in the coming months. And then border security, obviously, I think that'll be part of the reconciliation process. Next slide. Senate, similar issues. I won't go through those other than the Senate has the responsibility to confirm the Trump administration's cabinet and appointees. They're going to be very busy doing that. So a lot of the committees that we work with are going to be heads down, being in the confirmation process and not really worried too much about moving legislation. So we're going to be seeing that maybe later in the spring, which would be a good time for the board to go back to DC. Next slide. And so just wrapping up here, looking at what we're going to be working on. Urban canal legislation, as I mentioned, is going to be reintroduced. We're looking at whether to go with the 35%, or we have a Senate passed bill that the Senate would probably pass again. Do we go with that and then renegotiate it with the House at 35, or do we do both the same? So we're looking at what's the best way to do there. We obviously have the aquifer recharge legislation. We've got Wesley going back as a witness next week to testify before the House Natural Resources, Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries Subcommittee. And that should go through fairly quickly. We want to see the Carry Act, IIJ amendment, reintroduced. Anderson Rays, as you're probably going to hear from the Bureau of Reclamation, you've got another $7 million announced for additional funding out of the IIJA for that project. LOID reclamation funding, we're going to want to keep an eye on that and try to push that a little bit more. I heard Jennifer Carrington, the regional director, talk a little bit about that a couple days ago. There's a new bill that's been dropped by Mr. Costa, and I think Mr. Fulcher is a co-sponsor, so it's a bipartisan bill to tweak the small storage grant program. We've never been able to compete in that program for some of our recharge projects. What it is, it's a 25% grant. All you have to do is come up with a feasibility plan that's approved by Reclamation, and you put it in the pot, and then they choose who's going to get the grant. They had $25 million to spend in 2025. The reason why we don't compete very well is because the way the law is currently written, it's the limit on the surface storage is 200 acre feet to 30,000 acre feet. The making a aquifer recharge project fit in that is difficult, especially with some of these other aquifer recharge projects in other states, mainly California, but in Idaho as well. It's hard to, that's a pretty small project. And how do you measure the 30,000? Is how much you put in the ground? Is it how much you're storing, et cetera? Plus the fact that currently it's almost built for an aquifer storage and recovery rather than what we're doing, which is stabilization. So what we did is we worked with Mr. Costa's office to come up with changes to that would raise that total for an aquifer recharge project from 30,000 to 150,000 acre feet. And that's per project, not for the whole system. And so each aquifer recharge project, you would have up to 150,000 acre feet of water to be recharged on an annual basis. So that, you could average that or whatever, but it makes it more eligible. Also, we added something that basically eligible projects also include those that stabilize the aquifer. It's not just a storage, it's also aquifer stabilization. So that basically brings the Eastern Snake Plain aquifer into eligibility under this program. So those are the kinds of things that we've been working on. We'll probably want to get some testimony in as that bill is heard in the committee. And so we'll be working on that for you guys, and then obviously planning a DC trip to talk about our priorities with our delegation and committees.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, Al.
or can I ask about that last bill? Is 150,000 acre feet enough if we're going to try to fit the ESPA into that program?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Al, I think the issue is that how do you get the enviros and some of the other groups to agree that that's reasonable for a small storage program? Obviously, there's larger storage programs under the previous WIN Act, and then hopefully we'll be looking at a bigger water resource bill coming together in the next few months that maybe we can have larger projects in there. But for the 150,000 acre feet, we're looking at, we talked to Wesley and your guys here. They felt like a lot of the smaller, just individual projects would probably fall under that 150.
So we can individualize.
You can individualize those.
The aquifer
Right.
that's being, but we've got one project that's.
Right.
less than 150.
Exactly. So that's why we went ahead and agreed to that. We started out at 100, and then we went, well, what about 200? Well, that's too much. And so it's kind of the Goldilocks approach here. The 150 we made a deal on.
Okay, any other questions for Mark? Okay, Brian.
Mr. Chairman, Mark, very brief. I shouldn't even get into these weeds, but just yes or no on a lot of Idahoans, including me, are not big fans of giant turbine farms that BLM would like to shove on us. Senator Risch says that between he and President Trump, they can stop the Lava Ridge project. Do you think they can, or do we'll have other fight to do on that?
Well, I don't know a lot about that. I'm not sure how far along it was. I know they approved it. But it seems like they should be able to at least stop it or slow it down enough to where you get modifications. But I think Mr. Trump has said as recently as this last week that he doesn't want to see any wind turbines built on his watch. So I don't know that that's practical because there's lots of stuff in the pipeline. But I think you're going to see a slowing in this administration of support for those kinds of projects, especially wind. I think solar and hydro are some of the things that we want to start looking at. So I think that's going to be that. But I hate to say, yeah, they're going to be able to stop it because I just don't know.
That's true, Brian.
Okay, all right. Any other questions for Mark? Mark, we really appreciate you. You seem to keep your finger on everything and keep us appraised of what we need to do to continue to work with our federal partners, and we appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Thank you. Members of the board.
Okay, board members, I'd like to make another shift in the agenda. If I could have a motion to move the recharge number 11 recharge item moved up to right now.
I'll make that motion, Mr.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now move to recharge, Mr. Patton.
Okay, I think Wesley will lead off with a recharge report and then a couple other items related to recharge that we need to discuss.
Good morning, members of the board. Allow me to get my presentation up.
Sorry, I didn't give you a little more notice on that, Wes.
That's completely okay, sir. Okay, I think we're finally ready there. Okay, so as far as an update on the ESBA managed recharge program. Hmm?
Turn it off.
Thank you. Love technology so much. Anyway, so basically where we're currently at with the program for this season, we're a little over 63,000 acre feet. We're recharging around 242, and then we'll just go through really quickly of how it's being distributed in between Twin Falls, Southwest Irrigation District, and AFRD 2. And so this graph, everyone's kind of familiar with this one. I don't know if people remember from the past, there was a lot more movement in this graph, and basically with our partners, we're kind of getting it figured out where it's pretty smooth. And so right now it's pretty steady. You can see where on basically December 1st, we let approximately 250 go past Milner that we didn't divert. And it's been pretty flat and steady the whole time. And just got a report that the Milner pool levels pretty much where they want it at. And so this is pretty much what we're going to be looking at least in the near future, unless something changes. And so just to give an idea is out of Minidoka Dam, there's 434 being released, and we're diverting the 242 and approximately 250, 249 currently going past. And so that means we have a gain about 60 CFS. When I reported last November, there was discussion that we noticed the gains seemed to be way down. The gains weren't way down. There was a problem with the measurements coming out of Minidoka Dam. And so that threw our calculations off. So actually the gains have been pretty steady, what they have been the past few years. And so it's 60 CFS right now. What's predictable as we move along, those will probably decrease. Okay, so that's a really quick update on our current status. Are there any questions with what we're currently doing?
Any questions for Wes?
Okay, moving right along, going into our projects. I know this map is really busy and I apologize for that. To give an idea of what you're looking at here, the little green dots, those are all of the recharge projects the board has funded. And so that basically means we have first right of refusal on those. The blue dots are private sites out there. So it kind of depends. Sometimes we can use them, sometimes we can't. What the focus of this rest of this talk is going to be on, and I'll just go to the next slide, is here's our current projects that we're working on. So the green ones are ones that have been recently funded that are basically complete that I'll be talking about. The orange ones are under construction. And then the little pentagon shape, kind of the brown ones up there, those are test projects. And I'll explain that as we go through this. It kind of gives you an idea of all the current work we have going on. Okay, so as far as an update, down in the lower valley, there's these Southwest Irrigation District recharge wells. And so one of those wells was drilled. And they're actually going to look at going deeper, even though it was next to a current injection well that got old, basically couldn't be used anymore. When they drilled this one, the geology doesn't look as good. Actually, a lot of the pore spaces are filled up with probably mineral deposits. And so they're looking going deeper, seeing if they can get into some good zones. So we'll just have to see how that one kind of plays out. And so then the other one's the going sump. This is an ongoing project where they're looking at improving infrastructure that will be able to add 100 CFS of capacity that they can deliver to the going sump area. There's what's predictable here is we're probably going to see a proposal for the project because the original going sump area, in the past, it could take a lot of water, and that was last year. It got kind of plugged up, and so they don't know if they're going to be able to rehabilitate it or have to drill more wells to increase that capacity. That's forthcoming sort of thing. I haven't got a proposal from them at this point in time, but just to let you know what's out there. Okay, then moving to the upper valley, I'm going to go through the completed projects. Those are the ones in green, circled with yellow, which is a little kind of washed out here. So the Butte Market Lake Canal evaluation is complete. They presented at that this last fall to the board. And so with that, I'm actually meeting with the canal company at the end of this month to talk about what projects they would like to move forward with and to see what's coming next out of that, with the whole intention of increasing the capacity of that canal so it can run more recharge water when it's available. So with the Progressive Irrigation District, the South Fork Basin, that's basically complete. They just want a little fine tuning as far as working on the diversion structures kind of up and downstream. From the early test of it, that one will do 60 CFS. That could go up. This was just the first test of it. We'll have to see how it develops with time. So the New Sweden, head of the basalt, that basin's all complete. And from the test of last spring, that one is doing about 15 CFS. Not as much as we'd like. It's close to that area, kind of the round number we've used in the past throughout the ESPA, and there's a lot of variation, but like 2 CFS per acre. This is just a little bit under that. So we're hoping for a little bit better, but that's where it's coming in at. So those are the completed projects, and I know I'm going through these really quick. If there's any questions, please stop me. There's also the memo that was produced as far as the board materials, which has more information as far as how much has been allocated to these different projects. So the Egan Bench Recharge Well Complex was just funded last year. The proposal for this project is adding 10 wells. We did a test well in this area. It proved very successful. And so we're moving forward in this area. This is going to be a little longer project. There's also infrastructure that needs to be improved to deliver the capacity. And so then moving down, there's the Butte Market Lake Canal Company. Again, we had a test well in this area, proved very successful. And so this is drilling 2 new recharge wells. And that's scheduled to be completed this spring. So the Enterprise Canals on Highway 8 Basin. So the 2 recharge basins is part of this project, along with some canal improvements to add recharge capacity. And that's scheduled to be completed this spring also. Talked to Enterprise yesterday, and I was told the 2 basins are constructed and they just have to hook it up to the new pipeline. And so there's the 55th road expansion. This is one where a basin was constructed, and then they came in with a proposal to expand that. They're in the process of doing that. The original basin did around 30 CFS, and this is scheduled to be completed this summer or in the fall. Significant work has been done on the basin, and what I was told is if there's water available this spring, that they can do some temporary work to basically connect the 2 basins so the new area would be usable. And so then going to the test wells. So just to, given there's a lot of comment out there right now, how we basically work on the recharge wells, we don't know if a certain area is going to work or not. And so the first thing we do is we work with our partners, come up with locations, and we first test the area. First, we have to find out, is the area actually going to work or not as far as recharge? So far, some of them have been very successful. We've had one test in the Ryrie area where it was not. So we're not going to move forward with recharge wells in that area. So these are just tests, and that gives us an idea of how well the geology is going to work, if it's actually going to work for a recharge, and actually gives us an opportunity to look at the groundwater quality and the surface water quality and actually test these in action.
Wes, if I might, I think even before a test well is drilled, there's an evaluation made on the geology to determine whether it's even appropriate to drill the test well. That's the first step, isn't it?
Yes, there is, sir. And thank you for bringing that up. When these proposals come in, staff do an analysis on the geology and take a look at it. And do we think there's good, reasonable geology there that this is going to work even to start with? Absolutely. And so we have 4 of those. 2 are with the New Sweden irrigation district. The upper one is up around the head gates for the Great Western Canal. Then there's one next to the head of the basalt, which we already have a basin there. And so they're looking at, can we improve the capacity in that area? Then around Peoples Canal, around the Moreland area, and then the Aberdeen Springfield Canal, which you can see kind of vary at the next to American Falls. And that's called the Vanderford project. And especially with this one, we know in this area and in Peoples, basins don't work. In the Peoples area, basins don't work very well because there's a heavy clay unit. And so it's like, is there potential of getting below that into a deeper aquifer? And that's kind of same, with the Vanderford, we're looking at the potential of, is that going to work, getting away from the surface aquifer? I realize that was all really quick, a lot of information, but I would stand for any questions that you have.
Any questions for Wes?
Mr. Chairman, just one real quick.
Dean?
Are we running in mileposts, 31, or which ones are we running to on the Milner Gooding right at this time?
Right now, it's just 31. We started at 31 and 29, but I think we're just doing 31 right now. I'm not positive about that. We might be using both.
Just curious, thanks.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, you have a question, Brian?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, is it okay to talk a little bit about the letters we've been receiving?
Oh, we're gonna get to that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Wes. It's been brought to my attention that we're gonna get to the letter from the Idaho groundwater appropriators in just a minute. And as part of that discussion, it's been brought to my attention that we did not formally approve the non-diversion of a portion of the available water at Milner this season. I think we did that formally once through resolution, but since that time, it's been rather informal. And to kind of clarify for sure what we're doing there, we probably need to have a motion to formalize that for this season as we continue to work through and get our analysis out on how the recharge is working and the effects of not diverting a portion of the flow, if there are any impacts from that. So at this time, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we continue to not to divert for the 2024 to 2025 season of a partial volume up to 200,000
200 CF,
CFS.
250 actually is where we're at.
250 CFS, excuse me, through February 15th, 2025.
Okay, I have a motion. Is there a second? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. All right, we have formalized that. Now, we have received a letter from the Idaho groundwater appropriators. And they have some concerns about us not diverting the full amount of water that's available at Milner. And we probably need to have a discussion on that letter. Mr. Patton, Mr. TJ Budge is here from the Idaho groundwater appropriators. He is their legal counsel. And I think he has a few comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I do really appreciate you giving me a chance to speak to the board today for a few minutes. First, I do just want to compliment the board again and Wes on the magnificent job the board has done on recharging the aquifer. I traveled to Southwest Kansas about a month ago with Paul Arrington and a few members of the Surface Water Coalition and a few groundwater users just to see how they're managing their groundwater supply problems. And you may be aware of this, but they're in a part of the Ogallala aquifer that has been on a steady decline for decades, and they don't have any recharge. There's just not much they can do unless it comes in the form of rainfall. And you know, the big takeaway for me is, as bad as we think it is here, it's worse elsewhere. And I appreciate and just want to commend the board for the effort they're doing to utilize the resources we do have to stabilize our aquifer and to sustain our ag economy. That was reinforced just listening to Wes's presentation today, and I appreciate it. Now, I did want to come and just visit about the letter that IGWA sent to the board on Monday, and I trust everyone's received that, and I trust they weren't very happy to receive it. And I just want you to know, IGWA was not very happy to send it. IGWA really treasures the relationship we have with the board. We have a lot of gratitude for the way the board has grown and developed and is doing a lot more in this state to preserve water resources and the economy. And frankly, it's difficult to send a letter that is a little bit critical of your friends and people that you care about. I was thinking this morning, it's kind of like, maybe you had this experience, but I had a friend growing up, a very good friend. I once had to tell him I didn't like his girlfriend. And you don't want to say that to your friend, and they don't want to hear it from you. But sometimes as a friend, you feel like duty bound to say things that you don't want to say. And that's the feeling with the letter to the board. We don't want to criticize the board. We love the board. We appreciate our friendships individually with board members, and we appreciate all the board is doing. And so we're sensitive to the perception that it may seem we're looking a gift horse in the mouth, and we don't like being in this position. But I do want to give you just a little additional context as to why the IGWA board did feel duty bound to document its concern as we have in the past. And for some of you, this is old news, and for some of you, it may be educational. But the Two Rivers Doctrine and the Milner Zero Flow has been around for a long, long time, probably 100 years or more. It's been a defining characteristic of water management in the Upper Snake River Basin, into the early 1900s. And in the Snake River Basin adjudication around 2009, there was a question as to whether the court should make this part of its decree. So for the most part in adjudication, the court is just decreeing individual water rights. But the court also has the ability to decree provisions that are called general provisions that just govern water administration generally. And in the SRBA, there was a proposal to decree a general provision that would memorialize the Two Rivers Doctrine and the Milner Zero Flow forever. And that was turned into a battle between the state and Idaho Power Company. And my client, Idaho Groundwater Appropriators, they participated in that. If you ever want a history lesson about the Milner Zero Flow and the Two Rivers Doctrine, you can read the summary judgment briefs that were filed in that case. There was a Deputy Attorney General, some of you know, Michael Orr, who did a tremendous amount of historical research. It was really very impressive about the history of the Two Rivers Doctrine and the Milner Zero Flow. And water users, including IGWA, came side by side with the state and advocated that that provision be decreed in the SRBA, and it was. And for water users in the Upper Snake, both surface water and groundwater users, that principle or protection of water administration is sacrosanct. It's just very, very, very important. And so in 2020, I believe was the first time since 2015 anyways, that the board had elected not to divert its recharge water right and instead allow water to run past Milner Dam. And as everyone knows, that was still a time when we were concerned about the aquifer and aquifer levels and aquifer recovery and stabilization. And IGWA was surprised by that decision in light of the circumstances and its own, view of the world and what should be done. And so we sent a letter to the board and expressed our consternation that this had happened and had happened without any input from the water users. And at that time, the board stopped that practice. So they continued recharging the aquifer instead of letting water run past Milner. And we thought at the time that the issue had been resolved, so to speak. And then last year it happened again, and that was met with again a lot of frustration. And there's a perception, I don't know if there's any reality to it, but there's a perception among the groundwater users that this is happening based on private conversations, and it's not been a transparent process that involved input from water users. And so a year ago, rather than asking that the board stop the bypass, what IGWA did instead is said, could we have a meeting with the board and representatives of Idaho Power and just get around the table and talk about this, because maybe we're not seeing each other eye to eye. And that meeting was held about this time last year, late January, I think. And that was a productive meeting. And we felt like there was a change of course that happened at that meeting. We understood better the board's rationale for not diverting its water. We understood better the position of Idaho Power with cloud seeding and wanting to have a return on its investment. And we appreciated the dialogue that was opened, and we understood that going forward, that would be the course, that there would be a transparent discussion with input from stakeholders about recharge and cloud seeding and running water past Milner Dam. At that time, one of the frustrations that the groundwater folks expressed is that we weren't quite sure that Idaho Power was not receiving a fair return on its investment. Based on our kind of back of the napkin estimates, we thought they were. But we were told that a study needed to be completed that would determine the relative benefits of cloud seeding, how much water was getting generated and where it was going and who was benefiting. So we could have that discussion. And we appreciate the board for doing that. There's an effort involved to get good data so we can make good decisions. And the board said they were trying to complete that study by summer. Did not, no guarantees, of course. And so we set a follow-up meeting in June so we could review the study and have a discussion about where's that water going, who's getting the benefit from it, and then we could have a discussion with stakeholder input about what do we do, and if Idaho Power is not getting a fair return, that's not fair to them. We don't disagree with that, but we need to have assurance that that's actually the circumstance, and if it is, there needs to be a discussion. At least this is our perspective, that there ought to be input from the water users on how you respond to that. And there's more than one, potential solution to that. That meeting in June didn't happen because the study was not completed. And frankly, the groundwater users had their hands full with other stuff. In fact, the study maybe was not completed because there were things getting in the way of it. And we appreciate that. Nonetheless, it was our understanding that there wouldn't be another decision to not recharge the aquifer and run water past Milner until there had been a transparent discussion, a review of the study, and a process that would allow all the stakeholders to participate. And so when we discovered again a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, that the board had made that decision, we were caught off guard and surprised, and some frustration that maybe spilled over from other proceedings we've been involved in, and perceptions of lack of transparency and things of that nature came back to the surface, and there was just a lot of frustration among the groundwater users. And my biggest purpose in sending the letter is not to try to give anybody a black eye or anything like that. Our hope, what we want to see happen, is a change in the process like we discussed a year ago. We would really like that the board push pause on the bypass, allow the study to be distributed. I understand it has been completed recently. We've not seen it yet, but give people a chance to look at it and then have a discussion with all of the stakeholders that are really affected by it. Idaho Power, of course, the groundwater users, but also there's interest among surface water users in Water District 1 in this topic as well. And I think if we go through that process, two things will happen. We'll all have a better idea of what is fair and what is right, and we'll actually come to an agreement that everybody supports and feels good about. It may be the same arrangement you have today, but it may not, because it will invite other perspectives. And so my hope today is that the board would not continue to run the water past Milner Dam. Now, just a moment ago, you've made that decision, and respect your prerogative to do that. I will say that kind of reinforces the frustration that the decisions are made before the input is solicited. Perhaps the board wants to reconsider that. It was open to a discussion about continuing to bypass water. It's not off the table. If that's appropriate, we're open to that. If my clients are involved in a transparent process, they'll be supportive, or at least more understanding. There's some things that are really, really critical, we think, to bypassing water past Milner. One is that it's done in a way that ensures there's nothing that erodes the Two Rivers doctrine. It's really, really critical that somehow in some type of wording, reaffirmation, it's really critical we don't erode that, undermine it, dilute it, something of that nature. I think there's a way to do that. We don't want to increase the risk of water rights being curtailed. You can appreciate that. I think there's a way to achieve that as well. We're very worried. We've learned that there have been discussions with the power company about a long-term agreement. One of my board members talked to Mr. Patton about that, and we appreciate him bringing that to our attention. We're really worried that we're going to be told one day, here's the agreement, we hope you like it. And it may be a good agreement. It may be, I really trust the board is doing what they think is in our best interest and everyone's best interest. So I believe that, and I appreciate that reputation the board has, but I'm fearful if that's the process that's employed, it's going to make life harder for me and life harder for you. And the request, as stated in the letter, is that we would ask the board to hit reset and start a transparent process. And in making really critical decisions that have an impact on water management and that people feel really strongly about, that a lot of care is used to make sure that input is invited, that it's thoroughly considered. And I think if we do that, we'll all get along better. So I appreciate you allowing me to maybe be a little more long-winded than I should be, but I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Board members, any questions for TJ? Brian?
Mr. Chairman, TJ, I'm going to make this into a question, but to start with, I've got a little bit of, a few comments. And one of them, I appreciate so much what you and IGWA and the SWC all gave up and did to get this new agreement, which we all hope will stabilize the aquifer. And most importantly, we won't have any more of the curtailments like we did last year. Regarding the zero flow at Milner, I no longer work for Twin Falls Canal, but I did for 22 years. And so we operated Milner Dam along with Northside Canal. And of course, there's only been, there was always winter flow at Milner. That we've had the flow at zero at Milner hundreds of times probably in the summertime, and very, very few, mainly the last 2016 on, we've ever had zero flow in the wintertime. So, so I think the zero flow doctrine, there's always been a winter flow, but we've always had the ability to go to zero in the summertime. So I really like the idea that the board has, ability to either divert or not divert that recharge. Now, I wouldn't say that if I thought that this was going to jeopardize that agreement in any way. I don't believe that the 250 CFS Milner is going to increase any chance of anybody in being curtailed as long as they're, provided that they're doing what they've said in the agreement. So there's, my responsibility as a board is to, we don't just work for agriculture. It's true. I'm a farmer, and I like agriculture. I think it's the backbone of our state, and I don't want to see any farmers curtailed, and I want to see the aquifer stabilized. There are other uses that we have to protect too in our mission, including recreation, hydropower, minimum stream flows, those kind of things. And so in a bad year, we're not going to meet our 350,000. Everybody knows that we can't. There's just simply not enough, whether we have that 250 at Mill or not. And in a good year, we can do way more than that, mainly just based on the big flows that we can put into the lower valley. We can go to 2,500 CFS. So really, the 35 or 40,000 acre feet that will be going by this winter could be backfilled in 6 days if we have flow, significant flow over Milner and convert the whole 2,500 into our various recharge sites below. So our real goal, and it was in camp too, was to get a lot more recharge done in the upper valley, which then has a very direct impact on flows at Blackfoot and the curtailment scenarios because of the injury to the SWC is because of the, many times the low spring flows there at Blackfoot, which can both prevent Milner from filling I mean, American Falls filling in can really impact the natural flow of the Twin Falls Canal. So I don't want to, I want to get a lot more done in the upper valley. And when we do have the water, I want to do all we can in the lower valley too. But I think we need to have that ability to use the river for some other purposes too. And that's why the board, I think, I do welcome your more transparent process because, everybody needs to see why the decision's made and so I haven't felt like it's been completely transparent either, and that's not your fault or anybody else's, but it's just, there's a lot going on this year, so.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's why I voted that the board should be able to choose not to divert when we need to, and the river's important for a lot of things, and agriculture, of course, the most important, but water quality, recreation, a lot of other things are important, and I've recreated on that river a lot of years, so I've said enough, sorry, but I appreciate your comments a lot.
Yeah.
So what my question is, do you think that 200 CFS plus at Milner for 60 days or 70 days will increase the chance of anybody being curtailed if at least the new agreement is followed?
Yeah.
I don't think it will.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Olmstead and Mr. Chairman, if I may respond. In the grand scheme of things, 25 or 35,000 acre feet is not that much water. And that water will come out at Thousand Springs over time and, and it'll make a little impact at Swan Falls. But, and so I am sensitive to the board's position where it has lots of constituencies and I'm representing just one. And fairness is in the eye of the beholder. And I appreciate and respect the job that you have to hear from them all and decide what you think is in the best interest of everybody. I am optimistic that the new settlement agreement is going to avoid any breaching of the Swan Falls minimum flows. And it is going to allow the coalition to have a safe supply of water. And a few 10,000 acre feet is not gonna, in the grand scheme of things, is not going to upset the apple cart. But my constituency is coming off the most traumatic event of their life. And in their mind, what they see is there was a predicted demand shortfall of 74,000 acre feet that put them all at risk of bankruptcy. And then they see a number 35,000 acre feet of lost recharge, and they, in their perspective, they can't fathom that on the heels of a massive curtailment and a lot of pressure to reduce how much water they're using and do things that stabilize and recover the aquifer, it's hard for them to fathom that you would forego recharge under these circumstances. But this is just one perspective. So I really appreciate your comments, Brian. I'll also make just a brief response to a point you made about electing not to divert water. Nobody has to divert water. The Milner zero flow doesn't obligate any water right? It doesn't mean you have to use it. You get as a water user, you have the prerogative to divert water if you want. And I understand and appreciate the board's perspective that we don't have to recharge. It's our decision if we want to divert our water right for recharge or not. And they're right about that. There is a nuance in the Two Rivers Doctrine and the Milner zero flow. If you read the SRBA decree or the state code or the Swan Falls agreement, it says the water flow at Milner may be reduced to zero. It doesn't say it shall be reduced to zero. It just says it may be reduced to zero. And historically, that only happened in the summer, not in the winter. And so I understand that there's some frustration that now it's happening in the winter in addition to the summer, which has an effect on flows below and power generation and all of that. So 2 points in that regard. One is that the framework with the Swan Falls minimums and the zero flow, those were intended to strike a balance between beneficial use, consumptive use of water above Milner and hydropower generation below Milner. And the premise of the Swan Falls agreement is that those allowed for additional development of those water resources. There would continue to be growth in water use above Milner until the point that the Swan Falls minimums we hit the minimums and have to maintain that. And I believe, and the way that the Swan Falls agreement is written, that zero flow is year round. It's not just a summertime thing, but it's a year round thing. And so the premise of the agreement is that even in the winter, there can be continued development of the resource until it hits that zero level. The other point is that it's not just, when you read the law, it's not just that flows may be reduced to zero at Milner. It's also that in considering deliveries below Milner, we shall not consider water supplies upstream. That should not even come into the factor, and so come into play. And so from a lawyer's standpoint, I'll be honest, I have a hard time with the rationale for the water going over Milner. If water was going over Milner because it was flood season, that's just what happens. No problem. But water is going over Milner because a water right downstream is requesting it, even though they're getting their minimums at Swan Falls. And I believe, this is just my view, and other minds, they're reasonable differing opinions, but my legal view is that that component of the language in the Two Rivers Doctrine, that water flows upstream shall not be considered, is important. And it was put in there deliberately, and it was reaffirmed in 2009 deliberately, because that doctrine is to protect everybody upstream and allow full development of the water resource, even in the winter, as long as those minimums are met. Now, I do think the cloud seeding concerns that have been raised merit further discussion. Those are also something that can be taken into consideration in deciding not to divert. And we welcome a transparent discussion about that. And if that discussion leads to a continuation of water going past Milner, there's some really critical pieces that need to be in writing as part of that, in terms of reaffirming the zero flow, and we're doing nothing to compromise it or anything like that. And also, there are people in my camp who think that if a decision is made to let water run past Milner, there needs to be some credit if there is a breach of the Swan Falls minimums. And so we have had a breach for a day or two in 2015, and we don't think that's going to happen again. We sure hope not, but it could. If we have a multi-year drought, it very well could. And if that happens and there's a breach for a week or something like that, and or more, maybe a month, I have no idea, in August, and there's a demand for curtailment of trust water rights, I would anticipate that the holders of those trust water rights would learn, if they didn't know already, that there had been water run past Milner instead of recharging the aquifer that would have minimized or reduced that breach or prevented it. And there would be a lot of, I can imagine a lot of anger, but we can protect against that if we have this process and give and take and the stakeholders participate. So I don't know if that's helpful, Brian. That's my perspective.
I agree. The process needs to be detailed, and we're kind of going year by year at this point, and it needs to be a lot more clear for sure. Sorry.
That's fine. Any other questions from the board? Okay, thank you, TJ. We've got your letter and we'll give it its due consideration.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, all right. Does that cover everything we need? Is there something else that you want to do on recharge?
Recharge, we do need to discuss the recharge wells and some of the public comment you've been receiving.
Okay, I've got about 2 minutes and then I've got to leave. Why don't you give us a brief update on that? In fact, I think I'm going to turn the chair over to Ms. Cole-Hansen right at the moment.
Yes, the
Jay?
chairman and the director have an appointment with Speaker Moyle here in about 20 minutes, so they do have to get moving. The board has been receiving quite a bit of public comment particularly from certain neighborhoods in eastern Idaho where injection wells have been, or recharge wells are proposed for test construction. Given the extent of some of that public comment, it may be wise for the board to consider putting a pause on approving funds for any new injection wells for some time, and let the board evaluate that issue. I also think would suggest that the board request a presentation from the department on how the department reviews applications for proposed injection wells and the process that the department goes through to permit those. And we can set that up for an aquifer stabilization committee here in the next month or so.
Is there any comments from the other board members?
Madam Chairman, Brian, you think we need a motion today that we should pause any new injection wells until we have time to study this one? If so, I would make that motion.
Yeah, just to clarify, I think we want to pause all development on injection wells, whether funded or not, for a short period of time till we get some things sorted out.
So moved.
Just a clarification, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Olmstead, that would be for the board's participation in injection wells. That would have no bearing on any third parties.
A point of order, can we do that without it being an action item on the agenda?
It is, you do have aquifer recharge listed as an action item.
Oh, we do, okay.
This would fit within that category.
Okay, so I would entertain a second.
Second.
Okay.
Madam Chair, before we vote, I guess one of the things we're not putting a pause on is our studies of what we are learning about the existing injection well project. So we're just talking about funding new or ongoing projects. And we're not talking about stopping the evaluation, so we're doing it on local projects. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Yeah, that's
And with
correct.
that understanding, I'd be happy to vote yes.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. The motion is to stop, pause progress on injection wells, whether funded or not funded by the board. Okay. Is this just a voice vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, and then we'll get that presentation from the department queued up here, for the next month or so regarding how the department receives those applications and evaluates those applications on a regulatory basis.
Thank you. Okay, next item.
Okay, next item, Madam Chair, we'll go back to the number 8, the Iweary update.
Okay, I think we have Kendra Kaiser up. Right. Welcome, Kendra.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the board. Thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate your time. Today, I just wanted to give you guys an update on Iweary, both give you all a little bit of a reminder of the history of how the Water Resources Research Institute was established and what we've been up to in the past 6 months since I become the director. Some of you may be familiar, but the Water Resources Research Act of 1964 is what established the water research institutes that are located across the country. There are 53 other sister institutions, most of which are located at the land-grant universities due to the alignment with the mission of land-grant universities. So in the past 6 months, we have been working on a strategic plan for Iweary to make sure that we are addressing the things that we have been mandated to do through the Water Resources Research Act. That is in your packet, our draft strategic plan, and I'll just go over a couple of the highlights there. So our priorities in the next 3 years are to, number one, identify and coordinate actionable partner-driven water research that's relevant for the state of Idaho. Number two is to provide training and workforce development for the next generation of water professionals with a real focus on undergraduate and graduate research opportunities. And then to disseminate our research outcomes and generally broadly increase water literacy across the state. This includes the development of a new website, which we will be launching in the next month. And that's where we will host information about research outcomes, as well as tools like the tools that I've been developing over in the Big Wood. And then the last part of the strategic plan is the need to generate externally funded dollars to fund the work that we are trying to do and to facilitate collaborative partnerships both across all of the universities and with agencies in the state. The other component of the strategic plan is the creation of a new advisory structure. So as many of you know, IWERI was really involved in the development of the first East Snake Plain aquifer model. And over the past decade or so, we've kind of drifted into the background a little bit. And so the development of the advisory structure is to ensure that the work that we're doing at IWERI is aligned with the needs of the state. And the first component is the development of an executive board. On the executive board is Madam Chairman Joanne Cole-Hansen. We also have Matt Weaver from the Department of Water Resources, the Director of DEQ, and Paul Arrington from the Water Users Association. We will also have 2 rotating seats for an industry representative and a nonprofit organization. Our first industry representative will be Idaho Power, and the nonprofit organization is the Freshwater Trust, given their active engagement with work here in Idaho. And the role of the executive board is really to advise IWERI and promote us and help us identify resources. The next component of the advisory structure is the development of a research advisory committee. I'm really excited about this group. It's going to be a pretty large group, probably around 20 to 30 folks that are representing technical experts from across sectors and across the state. So we really want to capture needs from everyone, and their role is to review and prioritize our research objectives. So that group, we are still in the process of developing, and we are hoping to have the first meeting with them later this spring. Then the third part of the advisory structure is a new industry affiliates program. And there we are really looking to get perspectives from industry on what the latest and greatest is on their end of things, as well as to make sure that we are addressing their needs as far as new graduates and helping them with student recruitment. So groups will be organizations like Micron, Simplot, Idaho Power, and then we've also met with folks in kind of the ag value chain sector, so folks like Lamb Weston. So that's our advisory structure. The other thing that we've really been focused on over the past 6 months is talking to stakeholders about how IWERI can support their needs. This has been pretty extensive, so I won't go through the full list, but number one, we've been talking to IDWR monthly to make sure that we have open lines of communication and understand their needs. We've been talking with water users. This past summer, I was attending the negotiations in the East Snake Plain to make sure that I'm informed and understand some of the issues that are going on over there. We've been talking with watershed groups from across the state, cities, counties, and we've really been getting a lot of interest in all of the research needs that there are. In order to address all of these research needs, we need staff scientists at IWERI. Currently, the funding mechanism is that we get $150,000 a year through the USGS, and then that money is currently matched by the University of Idaho, largely through salaries at the university. And then of that money from the USGS, we distribute about 2/3 of it out to faculty across the state to work on projects. The only other mechanism for us to bring in funds for staff scientists is through projects or research contracts or externally funded grants. We are actively working on proposals and waiting to hear back on proposals that have already been submitted. The challenge there is that those opportunities are often only 2 to 3 years long, and the types of folks that will be applying for jobs like that are folks that are recent grads and are looking for permanent positions. So the risk there is that there could be high turnover in positions, and we would not be able to kind of develop the institutional knowledge and relationship with stakeholders that we think that we really need in order to conduct the research needs that have been identified. And so with that, we're working on an ask to the legislature to provide $1.5 million in base funding on an annual basis moving forward. And we are interested in receiving support from the Water Board in that request. That request would be on top of the department's existing budget as well as the Water Board's budget. So this would be a separate line item request. We've been working, we're talking with Jamie Neal on Monday, as well as other folks. We met with Wendy Horman this past week. We're a little bit off cycle. Since I started in July, this was not a request that could go in through the governor's budget, nor could it go through the regular State Board of Education budget. And so it sounds like one of the opportunities is to get line item funding, kind of like the Idaho Geologic Survey, which is also administered through the University of Idaho. And so those are all of my updates for today, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Kendra?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Kendra, would this request to the legislature be for funding starting in July? Is that what the?
Yes, sir. It would be for this July. And if it is not feasible to go through this year, then we will be working with the governor's office to get into the budget for next year.
Board
Madam
member.
Chairman, Kendra, is that ongoing or one-time money?
That would be ongoing money.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We look forward to seeing your research projects. And thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Madam Chair, we are at the Anderson Ranch Dam Raise update. Justin is leading off. Okay.
Welcome, Justin.
Thanks for having me. I will keep this brief so that we can get Board Member Van Stone on the road. It's a long drive up north. Just something quick for the board that the staff is going to start engaging with the storage committee to work on an allocation plan for the new water at Anderson Ranch. That's kind of our big update. With that, we do have Brian Horsbow from the Bureau of Reclamation for the Snake River Area Office here to give an update.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Appreciate the opportunity to brief you today as always. So I'm joined today by Chris Keith, our Senior Project Manager for the dam raise, who's here to answer any technical questions that you might have. Before I begin my update, I'd like to make a few remarks about the upcoming presidential transition. There's always some uncertainty for federal employees as we move into a new administration. However, I will say that, as you may have heard from Director Carrington a little bit earlier this week, that's nothing that we haven't been through before. We've been through several presidential administrations. And so while there will certainly be some policy changes and some other nuances that we'll have to work through, I don't expect any major shifts in our organizational direction. And I say this because Reclamation's mission of delivering water and power remains very relevant in terms of the nation's broad goals. At the local level, there will be some additional workload associated with our staff. We're already seeing that, but I can assure you that the Anderson Ranch Dam Raise remains the area office's #1 priority. So you have my word to keep it that way. My project updates today are brief. I know you've had a long week, many of you, and some of you are looking to get back to Eastern Idaho, so I'll keep this short. My updates today will focus on design updates, reinitiation of NEPA, and some good news for project funding, which you've now heard at least twice. This will be the third time you've heard about the good news there, but I will reiterate it because we're all excited about it. As far as the design updates, in December, we completed our 90% design for the reservoir rim projects. Those designs are currently being reviewed both internally and externally by our project partners. In terms of the dam raise, we're working hard to complete 90% drawings and specs by April of this year. As I've mentioned before, there are a lot of technical details associated with those designs that we need to get correct. So it is taking slightly longer than we had anticipated. As a result, the final 90% designs are now anticipated sometime this summer. These complexities do mean that the 100% designs are going to be pushed out into the fall of 2025. But unfortunately, the overall project schedule isn't yet affected, and we are still targeting 2027 to initiate construction. So that date has not changed. At the November update, I was happy to report that we completed an updated analysis for the potential water supply mitigation that may be required during construction. I again just want to reiterate that that is a very important piece of analysis for our environmental compliance. And it's also important to help existing space holders understand the impacts during construction and how we will mitigate those impacts. With respect to the environmental compliance, the supplemental draft EIS, we have started some initial draft document reviews, and we do anticipate publishing the SDIS sometime this summer. So that remains on task. And then lastly, again, extremely happy to report that Reclamation received an additional $7 million of federal funding as part of the bill, storage, and conveyance funds. Those, as a matter of process, those funds will be applied towards the project costs in accordance with the contract that we currently have between Idaho Water Resource Board and Reclamation. So with that, Mr. Chairman, Chris and I will take any questions, Madam Chair, my apologies. We'll take any questions that you may have. Oh, and before I open it up, if I might, Mark, the environmental water resource grant that Mr. Barker asked about, those projects are focused on restoration to add ecological value to water. So think fish and wildlife habitat, riparian and in-stream habitat, water quality type projects. So I thought I'd close that loop for you, Mr. Barker.
Are those projects only available if basin is done or basin planning?
No, they're standalone. Madam Chair, Mr. Barker, they're standalone.
Any other questions? Board Member Olmstead.
So some of those funds are coming through BOR and some through NRCS, right?
Madam Chair, Mr. Olmstead, I'm not certain about the second part of your question. I know that NRCS has programs that are similar, but whether or not they need to dovetail with the Reclamation Water Smart grants, I'm not certain. I'll have to get back to you on that.
City of Twin Falls is doing a big watershed restoration. They've just been funded for Rock Creek, which has been degraded for a long time. And I was thinking that came through NRCS, but I don't think there was Bureau involvement in that one, but I'll find out.
Yeah. Madam Chair, Mr. Olmstead, there's several what seem like similar programs across several of the federal agencies. So it doesn't surprise me that we see similarities.
So Brian, can I assume that we will see an updated cost estimate this summer when the 90% design is released?
Madam Chair, that is correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your time this morning, and we certainly appreciate all the work that went into the $7 million additional funding.
Yeah, you're certainly welcome.
Okay. Madam Chair, we're at the Mountain Home Air Force Base Water Resilience Project. It looks like Mike Morrison's gonna give us an update on that one.
Welcome, Mike.
Madam Chair, members of the board, once again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide you an update on the progress of the Mountain Home Air Force Base Water Sustainability Project. And I understand that brevity is valued today. And so I'm going to keep it pretty brief, and then I'm going to pass the balance of my time over to Mr. Ferguson again, and he's going to talk to you about extending the water supply bank lease and rentals related to this project. So let's see. So let's see, just in general, once again, we're on time and under budget. The pipeline and the penstock are complete. The penstock is that portion of the piping that comes up out of the canyon. That is complete. Got a picture of it here in a minute for you. Pump station and underground vaults and piping are complete, but we still have the rest of the pump station to build on top of it. So I've got a picture of that for you too. Staff and the Air Force are working on a gifting package that's needed to transfer ownership of the project to the Air Force. We're still working on that. And staff and the Air Force are concluding a water rights agreement. And again, Mr. Ferguson's going to talk a little bit about that. So if I could get the next slide, please. Okay, we are way down to past October 2024. Our next milestone is going to be May 2025, when we expect to have the intake, pump station, and penstock all complete by that date. The only things that are going to be left to do are commissioning. That involves getting water. That involves actually going through and testing it, and then training the Air Force to use it, so that by July 1st of 2025, we can hand it off to the Air Force. Next slide, please. So this is the penstock that I was talking about, and you'll notice you can't see anything. It's because it's underground. I know that there had been some concern at one point that this penstock, this big pipe would be sticking out of the ground where somebody could hurt it, cause it mischief, or it might be it would freeze up. It's underneath the ground. This, let's see, Madam Chair, Mr. Olmstead.
Sorry, Mike, Madam Chair, Mike, did you also bury the Simplot pipeline, or is it still there?
No, sir, we did not. If you look just very carefully in the brushes, you can kind of see it there. This is a point at which Simplot had partially buried it. So it's kind of, you can see little pieces of it, but no, we did not in general bury the Simplot pipeline. It's still there.
Looks nice.
And incidentally, all of this area is seeded so that this spring you ought to see something approximating local vegetation growing up there. Next slide, please. This is all that's left to do along the 14.4 mile pipeline alignment. And that is when we've got the pump station complete, they're going to come out and they're going to finish the fiber optics. And that's the orange utilities you see sticking out of the ground of the fiber optics. Next slide, please. Okay, 2 weeks ago, this is what the pump station looked like. You can see that big rebar cage. There is a lot of concrete there. Something that's much harder to see. I don't know, you can see the 3 concrete blocks. Those are actually access vaults down so that the pumps can pump water from a manifold. That manifold is attached to 2 pipelines that we've only got 30 feet of them yet, but they'll go out into the reservoir. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff going on under the ground here. They completed that 2 weeks ago, and then a week ago they put the concrete on it. Next slide, please. And that is actually the same spot from a little bit different vantage point. You can see that concrete is on it. So what's really left to do is to put all the equipment on that pad and then put walls up around it. And that's in progress right now. Next slide, please. Air Force, in order for us to do our testing, we need water tanks that we can pump the water into. The Air Force doesn't have a really great way to dispose of water yet. I was very happy when I went out there last week to see that we've got water tanks out there, or they're beginning to build water tanks. I was a little concerned that I only saw 1 going up. I contacted the Air Force. They assure me we're going to have 2. We need 2 water tanks to complete commissioning of the project. So that is ongoing. Next slide. And I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Mike on Board Member Gibbs?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's not a question, but it's a comment, Mike. This project started while I was in the legislature, obviously, and so it's been dear to my heart. And I'd love to be out there for the testing when you pump water over the hill. So,
let's see, Madam Chair, Mr. Gibbs. We would love to have you out there. And I think I've had that expressed by also Mr. Olmstead has expressed a desire to come on out there. And so maybe we're just going to have to go arrange a trip sometime in May or early June for everybody to go out there. So yeah, you can see it, and maybe you can see the testing getting done.
Madam Chair, just one comment. I'm looking forward to the letter to Simplot that says we're done.
Madam Chair, Mr. Barker, I am looking forward to writing that letter.
Board Member Olmstead.
Mike didn't show a picture of the intake pipes going out into the reservoir. Are those partially installed yet, or?
So the picture we showed with the cage kind of back behind it, we've got about 30 feet of those. They actually are going to go out a few hundred feet into them. So we've got a little bit of them there that are kind of a stub. At some point here in the near future, what they're going to do is they're going to bring they're going to build the pipe. They're going to float it. They're going to put anchors on it. They're going to drop it, connect it to the existing pipe, and this will require divers. And then that's going to be one of the very last things that happens. I personally want to see that.
All right, well, I do believe we have an action item related to this.
If we could move to the next slide.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to pass the balance of my time over to Mr. Ferguson. That's that fellow on the left. Last time we went out to take a look at this. And he's going to introduce a proposed resolution to extend water supply bank leases and rentals related to this project. Justin?
We were friends. Thought we were friends. So I'll keep it brief, not as brief as the update. And I believe in your materials, I've got a resolution. Oh, perfect. So really all this resolution will do is take the existing lease and rental package for the water rights, 103A, 103B, and 10506, and extend them out through 2075. That'll be the duration of the agreed upon water use agreement between us and the Air Force. So I've got in your materials on the resolution on line 44.
Can we
And-
pull the resolution out?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
I got it, Justin.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So it's in my pocket. Oh, cool.
Okay.
And it's at the bottom of page 2. Also, thank you for pulling that up. So then now therefore start on line 44. This would just be to extend the lease and rental approvals through 2075. And then line 48, the further it be resolved, will allow the executive manager of the board to execute any additional agreements, lease and rental packages for these water rights. And the purpose there is, as the Air Force reduces their demand and usage, we can modify the rental agreement to reduce the amount of water going to the Air Force. And so this will give the executive manager authority to reduce that rental as needed. And with
Just a clarification here, Madam Chair. The reason this resolution is needed is typically water supply bank rentals and leases extend out to 5 years.
Yeah.
Any water supply bank leases and rentals beyond 5 years actually need the approval of the Water Resource Board, as the board manages or oversees the operation of the water supply bank.
So, Madam Chair, Brian, we have the ability under the agreement with the Air Force to, if they decide to pack up and move to Dubai, that we don't no longer have to keep it in the water bank for 50 years, right?
That is correct. I believe we have the ability, as Justin just mentioned, if the Air Force is not using a portion of it, then we can modify this agreement going forward, or all of it going forward.
And I had meant to put in there that in the water use agreement, we have a five-year data sharing line item. So every 5 years, we will get their usage data to adjust that rental as needed.
We have the ability to rent that water to somebody else if they're not using it, right? The portion. I think that's what the agreement said.
As far as I know, that is correct. I don't see any reason we could not.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the resolution presented for the application of or the extension rather of the lease for a 50-year period as set forth in the resolution.
I'd second it.
All right, it's been moved in second. Any further discussion?
This can be just a voice vote.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right.
I have a question. I just want to know if Mr. Patton's going to be around in 2075 to make sure this takes place.
I'm pretty sure.
Madam Chair, Mr. Gibbs, I hit my rule of 90 in 3 years. Make of that what you will.
You may have mentioned that to me earlier.
Is that your age, 90?
Dale will still be here.
All right,
Thank you, Justin.
I passed that already.
Justin will though.
Okay,
Cloud seeding update is next, Madam Chair.
and we'll welcome Kayla up to the podium.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Let's pull up here. All right, perfect. Well, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. I will try and keep it very brief as I am your very last person today. I'm gonna take that as it's because you saved the best for last. So today, I'm just gonna briefly cover some information on cloud seeding, our current operations, current projects for the programs, and then briefly note where you all will be able to now find some of our program reports. So to start off, I just want to remind everyone that we now have a cloud seeding website with all of this information for both the public, legislators, any policy leaders, anyone interested in information on cloud seeding. You can find information on current operations, reports, and any other information on the program on our website. Very briefly, we currently have 4 programs total in the state of Idaho that are authorized to operate cloud seeding operations. The first and foremost of which is the Idaho Collaborative Cloud Seeding Program, which you all participate in with Idaho Power Company and water users. The second authorized project is the Idaho Power Company Payette River Basin project that is operated independently by Idaho Power Company. And then we also have the High Country Resource Conservation and Development Program in the Upper Snake River Basin and the state of Utah's Northern Utah program that falls over into the southern part of, Idaho. So very briefly to set the stage, as a reminder, we have the West Central Mountain Project over here on the west side of the state, which includes the Payette and the Northern Fork, the Boise in the middle, and the Wood. Idaho Power having their independent project outlined in red at the top of that. And then again, over in Eastern Snake River Plain, we have the Idaho Collaborative Cloud Seeding Program overlaying with those green dots that you can see by the High Country Resource Conservation and Development Program. So an update on operations, I'll start with the Boise River Basin. Suffice to say, it's been a little warmer the first part of the season, so there's been fewer seeding opportunities, only about 5 to 7 storms between November and December total that they were able to seed. And I call this out as oftentimes from some of our operators, you will see a total number of generator hours or a total number of flight hours. And I would encourage you or remind you that that covers all of our infrastructure. And so when we see these hours, that's a number of hours for all the infrastructure, but it's really only encompassed in about 5 to 7 different storms. So a slow start to the season, but I think we're hoping we'll have a few more opportunities through January and into February. Wood River Basin, similar trend here, lower than normal opportunities that we've had for cloud seeding. Again, hoping that we'll see a little bit more moving into the next few months. Moving up to the Upper Snake River Basin, fortunately, we've seen a little higher than normal opportunities in November, a little bit warmer December with less than opportunities, but we've still had about five or six storms throughout the season up there. Idaho Power Payette River Basin program, it's been a similar trend, slow start to the season with not a ton of opportunities. And again, the Boise, the Wood, and the Payette River Basin are really managed as one region. And so that's why a lot of these numbers look pretty similar across those basins. Moving on to the High Country RC&D program, currently, they've seeded about the same number of storms, between 5 and 7 storms, with a total for the season to date of about 325 generator hours in the Upper Snake River Basin. Moving on to the Northern Utah cloud seeding program, they've seen, again, similar trends. They've seen about 7 or 8 storms that they've been able to seed this year. Currently, they've only got about 3 manual generators in the southern portion of Idaho. However, we have received a 44-page proposal from the state of Utah on a coordinated effort in the Bear River Basin that would expand their Northern Utah project. And so your staff are currently working with their staff to organize that into a formal proposal that the state of Utah will present before you all sometime in the next couple of months. Other updates I wanted to make you aware of in the state of Utah. They are currently going through large-scale expansion of their cloud seeding program. As you recall, their budget last year went from about $500,000 to $12 million. I believe that's about $5 million in ongoing just for the cloud seeding program alone. So they are actually moving their entire infrastructure across the state to remotely operated generators. I think they're going to go away from the manual generator projects. They are also starting experimental drone projects out of Logan this year. In addition to that, they are working with other stakeholders across the state of Utah to expand radar networks so that they can more efficiently evaluate and quantify cloud seeding.
as well as developing a computerized system that would automate reporting of all of their infrastructure. And that automated reporting system would be available to their state and public leaders. Yes.
You mentioned Utah is using drones. Is that to fly flares into the clouds?
Madam Chair, Mr. Barker, so currently those drones actually are operational in the state of Oregon under a COA permit from the FAA, and so that's what they'll be seeking in the state of Utah. And those drones have the ability to go up to about 12,000 feet utilizing a solution-based silver iodide, and then they do have some de-icing capabilities on them as well. So my understanding is the drones work sort of in a juggling act because they can't sustain ice for too long. So they'll go up, start seeding, and then when it sustains too much ice, the next drone will start going up and it will cycling out. And so, I can't say what it's from, but Eastern Oregon has seen an exceptional snow year so far. And it's the first year that the state of Oregon has started cloud seeding, and they are using drone technology over there. So that's my current understanding of it. And drones are a part of Utah's proposal to the state of Idaho.
Seems cheaper and safer than manned aircraft.
I personally can't speak to that yet.
Madam Chair. Okay, back to the drones, 12,000 feet enough elevation to do what they need to do?
So the benefit of the drones, to answer that question, so recall that we use ground infrastructure and aircraft to be flexible in different layers of the atmosphere. And what we've seen through some of our studies, particularly in the Bear River Basin, is that a lot of the super cooled liquid water content, what we need for seeding, actually exists in a middle layer. And so it's those middle layers that those drones would generally be targeted for. So they'd allow us to concentrate some efforts on the lower elevations. Drones would, give us more ability in that mid elevation where we can't hit with either an aircraft or a generator. And then we would continue to use aircraft to get those high elevation areas, which generally allow us the most flexibility with our storms. So I don't know much about it and their applicability in the state of Idaho. It's not something we have started investigating, but there are a lot of programs out there who are actively looking at moving forward with it. I think the biggest limitation right now is FAA permitting. And so that is the only reason that Rainmaker, they're the new company out of California, that they have been able to utilize drone technology, is that there is an existing COA permit under the FAA in Eastern Oregon that allows them to do so. So lastly, I'll just sum up with some of the other current projects for this program. The cloud seeding analysis, as you all are aware, we've started rolling out some of those results to our stakeholders. I did present the results of those to both Water District 63 for the Boise River Basin and the Wood River Basin, Water District 37 just this past week, actually on Monday of this week. Our plan is then to present this analysis to Water District 1 at their annual meeting sometime in March. And we will be working with IGWA between now and then to present those results to them as well. So those results are available and we're hoping to get those out to everybody within the next couple of months. And Madam Chair, I would say largely that's just been a staffing limitation for this program, as there's just a lot going on.
May I interrupt for
yeah, absolutely.
When would the board be able to see the results?
Madam Chair, I'm gonna maybe direct that question to Mr. Patton.
Madam Chair, I think we could schedule that up. I'm not sure I want to get ahead of the rollout to Water District 1 and IGWA, but I think we could probably set up a cloud seeding committee to talk about those results about the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So kind of moving on from the cloud seeding analysis, obviously we have a lot of tools and technology that we're utilizing for this analysis, and that is largely why it has taken so long. It's really answering 3 separate questions. How much precip did we generate? How much did that equal in a water volume, which is obviously what we're most interested in identifying so that we can determine the cost efficiency to the state. And then where does that water volume go, or how does it impact the system? And so we obviously have a lot of improvements that we're still working on in those. Most notably, one of the ones we're prioritizing this year is the development of the Wood River Basin and the planning model. That way we can do some similar analyses that we've done for the Boise and the Wood as well. Liquid propane investigation is another project that we are actively, so we did actually have our first IOP, or observational periods, for liquid propane the beginning of this month, so I won't receive any reports or updates on that until the end of this month. But again, the state of Utah has partnered with us in this investigation by funding the principal investigator that will be led by the National Center for Atmospheric Research. We have also partnered with Cryo Toolbox and Boise State University to conduct weather instrumentation and the collection of data. And then, of course, our partners at Idaho Power are providing a liquid propane generator for this experiment. Update on that timeline. This will be the first winter of observations, and over the next year, based on our findings of observations from this winter, will guide the development of the next few years for this project. So we hope to have some results for you all on our findings this summer, and some next steps from here. Other than that, we have the Lemhi River Basin feasibility and design. Those results we have recently received, and we are working with NCAR to schedule time before you all to present those results. Going off of that, the state of Montana has also completed their feasibility and design just across the way. And they have expressed some interest in collaborative efforts should either project move forward. But my understanding in talking to their coordinator this morning was that they've had some hangups in their legislature and they're not quite sure where they're going to go from here at this point. So they've seen that feasibility and design. Their legislature meets biannually, and they will let us know sort of what their intent is after that. Bear River Basin, as I mentioned, we do have a large proposal from the state of Utah that I'm working with their staff to put together for you all and present. We are working to incorporate the state of Wyoming into that conversation, but I have not caught up with them quite yet. And then lastly, in terms of program administration, as you all are aware, I had some discussion with you all in September at a cloud seeding meeting about proposed updates to our reporting. So I have delivered a red line version of these proposed updates to all of our program operators and stakeholders at this point. The next step for that is for them to review that information, to coordinate with us on any challenges or concerns with these reporting requirements. And then we will move forward with reviewing that with our legal team before a resolution is presented to the board to update the reporting requirements. Another update in terms of program administration, I had mentioned the Congressional House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology had ordered a report from the Government Accountability Office on cloud seeding. That report was delivered or published on December 19th. With their main findings being the lack of available information, data, and tools for analysis, which will help public agencies to assess their return on investment. And so the unfortunate part of that is that if you all recall, we are working collaboratively with Idaho Power on the cloud seeding model to eventually develop this tool for quantitative analysis. A part of that work has included a WaterSmart grant in the amount of $300,000 to support that. And the findings of that WaterSmart grant were presented by Idaho Power and NCAR just this week, unfortunately, after the GAO had conducted this report. And the downside of that is that we have actually made quite a few advances in quantitative analysis here in the state of Idaho through our efforts. And so I hope they will take that into consideration as they move forward. And of note is there is some policy recommendations that have been made as a part of this report. So you can find that report just by Googling GAO cloud seeding report. It should be the first thing that comes up for you. And then the last thing I will leave you with today is that next week I will be leaving for the United Arab Emirates to present on our program at an international water enhancement forum on water supply sustainability. And so this is a coalition of researchers and water policy leaders from across the world, including China, Europe, South America, the United States, who basically all participate in precipitation enhancement. And given Idaho has sort of led the way in the terms of glaciogenic cloud seeding, they're very interested to learn about our projects and programs, about the modeling technologies, research, and more importantly, the collaborations that we have established to make our program successful. So Madam Chair, that is the last update that I have for you. Oh, I'm sorry. The last update that I have for you is that I do now have, all of these reports and information, everything that I've covered, reports from our operators. Those can be found on your website under the reports and documentation tab. Including monthly reports that are not currently required. However, our operators have been willing to provide. So Madam Chair, that is the last of my presentation. I will stand for any questions.
Any questions for Kayla?
Madam Chair, not a question, but I attended Kayla's presentation to the Water District 63 Advisory Committee. She did a fabulous job, and compliments to Kayla, and it was well received by the water users, and so far they haven't tried to pull their money back.
Madam Chair, Kayla, I've had some comments on your podcast on the ranch. Several really good comments, like, again, appreciate what you've done there and congratulate you on the
Thank
good
you.
job you've done on that. So very informative, a lot of information for people, and they've come out having some knowledge of what, cloud seeding is, because,
Yeah.
that is another hot button issue also.
Madam Chair, with that, I would just like to add that the World Economic Organization came out with their annual report just the last few days. And the number one world risk identified for the next 2 years is misinformation and disinformation. Number 5 over the next 2 decades. And so relevant to this program, I'll just leave you with that bit of information.
We have our challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Thank you, Kayla. And let me know if you need a University of Idaho sweatshirt for your presentation in the.
Absolutely. I may take you up on that, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Next item, Madam Chair, is potential legislation of interest by Garrett Baxter.
Good morning still, Madam Chair, members of the board. Again, happy to be before you to talk about legislation that will be of interest. We are at the early days of the 2025 legislative session, but folks have been busy already. And so I got a number of things to update you on. And let's just go ahead and jump right in. And I'll start with some pieces of legislation that are going to be or have been discussed, and some of which are being supported by the Idaho Water Users Association. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about relates to a topic we talked about last meeting back in November, and that's the domestic exception. You guys might recall that this is the statute that authorizes somebody to go out and develop or put in a well and establish a water right for small domestic uses. And you don't have to go through the normal water right process. And we talked about last meeting how IGWA has gone in and created a legislative committee to study this, and actually did this quite a while ago. And it's been, I think, multiple years now. I think we've been working on this piece of legislation. And last meeting, I thought, well, I don't know if water users are going to get something forward for this legislative session. Well, Paul Arrington must have been listening, because shortly thereafter, he got his whip out and pushed very hard on that committee to meet and come forward with language. And he has been working very hard, meeting with different groups about possible legislation. And in fact, I think I saw an email earlier this morning that he believes that he has a final draft associated with that. And the water users are going to be taking a vote via email today about whether or not to present it. So because it could be voted to support and move forward rather quickly, I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about and outline what that does. Now, the draft, at least of the last version that I saw of this legislation, both narrows and broadens how the domestic exception can be used by developers and others within a subdivision. As to the narrowing, in those areas in which the director has put in place a moratorium, created a groundwater management area, or designated a critical groundwater area, so those locations where we have water supply issues, developers would only be able to rely upon the domestic exception to establish and use multiple domestic water rights from a single point of diversion in a subdivision. And they can only do that if that water is going to be used for in-house use only. So no outdoor irrigation, no existing exception of up to a half acre. So what does that mean? Like, for example, in the ESPA, where we do have a groundwater management area designated, developers won't be able to continue the current practice where they go out and, let's say, develop a 50-lot subdivision, drill in 50 individual wells, and have a half acre of irrigation associated with that. That window would shut. But what they will be able to do going forward is drill one well and rely upon the domestic exception to provide that water for the in-house use for each of those homes within that subdivision. For in-house use and also for watering of livestock. I don't want to forget that. That's an important piece that's been tacked on there as well. So in that circumstance, if they do want to provide outdoor irrigation, what will they have to do? They'll have to put in, for example, maybe a surface water supply system from a local irrigation district if that water has been available. Or if they want to have outdoor irrigation, they'd come to the department, apply for a water right, and then they'd have to provide mitigation associated with that. So really, from my standpoint, what this legislation does is two good things. It reduces the number of holes that are overall punched in the aquifer associated with domestic wells. And it really ensures that there will be mitigation associated with irrigation going forward, or existing surface water supplies will continue to be used for outdoor irrigation. So those are really a key component of this legislation. A couple of other key components associated with it. The legislation puts in new enforcement processes and penalties for the department if somebody is not complying with domestic limitations. So new code section 421701C will be created associated with that. And another key change is that it goes in and modifies current county zoning statutes and just reinforces that premise that we've all talked about in the past that's so important, that counties ensure that if surface water is reasonably available for continued use, they will continue to mandate that as associated with the development of subdivisions. So again, water users, it's my understanding, are going to be taking a vote on that draft today. Is there any questions about domestic legislation? Because I think that's probably the most important thing I'll be talking to you about today, at least from a global perspective. Any questions about that?
Just real quick, Derek, and because I sat in on the, the water user meetings, but I don't always hear everything. So, because I have an existing, domestic well, and I feel like I should pay something for mitigation to somebody because it's free for me. But this legislation would not impact any grandfather, I guess you could say, domestic wells.
No, this is applying to new wells and developments going forward. Mr. Olmstead, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, any other additional questions?
Any other additional questions from board members? Is that the only item of interest?
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay.
All right, we'll move on. Second legislative idea that was explored recently at the Water Users relates to Chapter 9. Now, you and I talked about that a little bit last time as well. Chapter 9 is the statute that governs distribution from waters, ditches, and laterals. Now, we talked about how this chapter is very outdated, and the water users have created a legislative committee to study that and look at ways we can maybe improve Chapter 9 and Chapter 13, which overlaps in a number of different ways. And the water users are going to undertake that effort over the next year. But there was a specific piece related to Chapter 9 that Bigwood Canal Company, in fact, wanted to see if they could get modified this year. And now they're proposing legislation that would modify a statute so that canal companies and other irrigation entities may appoint a lateral manager if the lateral didn't put in place a lateral manager and somebody from that lateral comes forward and asks for the appointment of the lateral manager. Right now, only water manager or water districts, water masters, or irrigation districts can appoint a lateral manager in that circumstance. Bigwood Canal Company wants that expanded to allow companies and other irrigation entities to be able to appoint lateral managers in those circumstances. The water users voted to support that legislation, so I would anticipate we'll see a bill related to that relatively quickly. Another piece of legislation deals with irrigation assessments. Legislation is being proposed that would make sure that irrigation district assessment liens remain in effect and have, in fact, priority position over mortgage liens or other claims against the land when somebody forecloses. This language just goes in and makes it crystal clear that, yep, those irrigation assessment liens remain in that priority position. And the water users did vote to support that legislation, and so equally I expect a RS to be probably floating up sooner rather than later related to that one as well. Another one, just very shortly or very quickly, piece of legislation was proposed to support Well, actually, it was proposed by Flood Control District 10, and this would update the competitive bidding process that flood control districts use and actually address some other administrative and, I'd say best characterized administrative processes associated with flood control districts. And the water users did vote to support that legislation as well. And now I threw out a whole bunch right there real quick. Let me pause to see if there's any questions related to any of those.
Any questions?
All right, Madam Chair, I'll continue on. Now, one piece of legislation that was discussed and moved to a work group relates to both IDWR and the board's hearing and order issuing processes. Now, a piece of draft legislation was brought to the water users that would do two things. First off, it would allow a party in a contested case or the director to ask the Office of Administrative Hearings to assign a hearing officer to that contested case. What is the Office of Administrative Hearings? It's a state agency that has basically a bullpen of hearing officers, and they hear contested cases in, for example, things like health and welfare cases. So allow somebody to ask for a hearing officer to be assigned from that agency. Second, it would prevent the department from issuing orders without first having a hearing in various circumstances. Now, the department does have concerns with regards to this legislation, and those concerns have been expressed and discussed. And the department will be working with the Idaho Water Users Association Legislative Committee to see if those concerns can be addressed. I did just want to identify to you that there is that conversation going. A legislative subcommittee has been created to study that legislation. And so just be aware that that is out there. And there will likely be more to come on that piece. Now
Board Member Barker.
Have you looked at that proposed legislation to see what effect it would have on the board's process?
Madam Chair, Mr. Barker, definitely if somebody, I need to go back and take a look and see if whether it specified just the department's contested cases or if it included the board. My knee-jerk reaction was that it included somebody could ask the board to equally appoint an OAH hearing officer, but I need to go back and double check a look at that. With regards to the orders that the board issues, my experience that most of the orders that the board has issued have been after an administrative proceeding. Let's say there's somebody that challenges a stream channel alteration permit, which under the legislation, under Idaho code, that comes up under the board, and the board generally appoints a hearing officer to hear that matter and issues an order. So I don't think it will have as a significant impact for the board's direct activities. But I need to study that a little bit further and see if there's indirect implications for activities related to the board.
It could have an effect on who we would be able to appoint as a hearing officer.
Correct. So, Madam Chair, that's what I have as to water users legislation. One bill that I do want to highlight that has been introduced to the legislature already, and this is House Bill 14. This bill has been titled the Idaho Code Cleanup Act, and it gives all state agencies until September 1st, 2025, and yes, I did say 2025 this year, to review their enabling statutes, associated code sections, and any code sections they may enforce. And the agencies have to report to the legislature all sections they deem obsolete. So it's being characterized as a continued red tape reduction act type analysis. Now, the department did go through this type of legislative review back in 2021. I think it was when we undertook that effort. So unfortunately, I think a lot of the low-hanging fruit has already been struck out, but this would equally apply to the board. We need to go through the board's statutory authorities as well and see if there's anything deemed obsolete there, and then report that to the legislature. So just wanted you to be aware that that bill is out there and might require some staff from the board's assistance to go through and look at that, and they might be talking to you about that in the future. So with that, Madam Chair, that's my report. Happy to answer any questions that folks may have.
Any other questions for Gary? I am not seeing any, and thank you for that report, and we look forward to hearing from you in March.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Do we need to take a break?
You know, we're 5 minutes away from being done.
Okay.
Next will be, an update on the administrative rules process from Eric.
That right, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to give a brief, less than 5-minute update on the department's rulemaking efforts. I am scheduled to present to the Senate Resources and Environment Committee on Monday, January 27th at 1 p.m. and the House Resources and Conservation Committee on Monday, February 3rd at 1 p.m. or 1 p.m. The 4 zero-based review rulemakings that I'll be presenting are 370301, our adjudication rules, 370302, our beneficial use exam rules, 370303, our injection well rules, and 370309, our well construction standard rules. And then I will also be presenting one amendment to 370311, which is the rules for the conjunctive management of surface and groundwater. For the upcoming season, 2025 through 2026, wow. We're scheduled to conduct 3 zero-based review rulemakings. These include 370204, the Shoshone-Bannock Tribal Water Supply Bank rules. Those are board rules. 370307, the Stream Channel Alteration rules, which are also board rules. And then finally, 370312, Water District 34 Water Distribution rules. And those are IDWR rules. Teams have been formed and for all 3 rulemakings, and we're actively working on the submittal that we owe DFM. That will include a recommendation memorandum, prospective analyses, notice of intent, and the draft Strawman rules. Collectively, we hope to get these documents submitted to DFM by March 1st. That'll allow us to get into the April administrative bulletin and allow us to have our first meetings in the latter part of April, 21 days after the initial publication. With that said, I think that sums everything up. Happy to stand for any questions Madam Chair, the board may have.
Any questions for Eric? All right. Oh, board member.
Arm down.
Board member, you don't have a question?
Natural reaction.
Okay, all right. Good luck with your presentations.
Thank you.
Yeah, good luck.
Appreciate it. All right, next item.
You're at non-action items for discussion that any board members may have.
Are there any non-action items that anyone would like to discuss?
Madam Chair, yeah, I just want to Chair on her presentation to the Water Users Association. I thought it was very well done and very well received, and I think that chart that at the end that you and the director both showed is important for the water users to understand how our projects are dispersed across the state. And that is information that people, that may be some, what was Kayla talking about, misinformation, that this communications that are not well known. So that was really, thank you.
Thank you for those remarks. And yes, we did not coordinate our presentations, and we both chose that as our last slide. So, yes.
And the well-deserved award.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. It's a later day. All right, no more non-action items. Next meeting in a.
Okay, you are it. We have a next special board meeting scheduled for January 31st. We'll actually have a couple committee meetings that day, including a finance committee meeting to deal with Water District 63's next stage in their drains proposal. And then the plan would be, assuming the finance committee approves that, come out of the finance committee and go into a special board meeting to approve that.
So that's a Friday?
31st, yes.
Is a Friday.
Yes. We will likely need another special board meeting sometime in February that's not yet been scheduled, in part to deal with the some of the rule submittals that Eric just discussed. Then beyond that, the next regularly scheduled board meeting is set for March 20th and 21st here in Boise.
All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn then.
I don't move.
Is there a second? Okay, it's been moved and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Run, Dale, run. Somebody hit the elevator door for him.
Missed it by 30 minutes.
Yeah.